Does your wife have any idea what you're doing? When will we meet again? Eleanor's heart skipped a beat as she read the message. Her mind raced, the words echoing in her head. What does this mean? Her breath became shallow, her fingers gripping the phone tightly as panic began to rise. Could it be? Victor, the man she trusted with everything, was hiding something from her. But what was it? The weight of the unknown crushed her chest. She thought she knew him. But now everything felt like a lie. No. Eleanor's thoughts swirled in chaos. This can't be real. The seed of suspicion. Location. Eleanor and Victor's mansion. A moment of doubt. The mansion was still, the kind of quiet that only the wealthy and powerful could afford. Eleanor sat in the living room, her gaze lingering on the phone that lay on the coffee table, as if it were mocking her. She had everything, a life filled with luxury, wealth, and success. But beneath that, there was something more, a feeling of unease that she couldn't shake. Eleanor had spent her life building an empire, making strategic decisions, and keeping things in order. She was used to controlling every situation, but this was different. This wasn't something she could control. Her hand reached out and picked up the phone. The message that flashed across the screen caught her off guard. Are you sure Victor isn't hiding anything? Same time, same place, and today? She froze. The words hit her like a hammer, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. Same time, same place. Today? Eleanor's pulse quickened, a cold shiver running down her spine. Who was sending this message? And what did it mean? For a moment, she thought it was just a mistake, a misdirected message, a glitch. But as she read it again, her heart sank. Could it be possible? She had never doubted Victor before. They had been married for years, built an empire together, shared everything, or so she thought. The thought lingered like a dark cloud, and Eleanor's mind began to spiral. Was he seeing someone else? It couldn't be. No, it had to be some mistake, some misunderstanding. But the nagging doubt wouldn't leave her. She couldn't just ignore it. Something inside her whispered that there was more to it, something she wasn't seeing. She stood up, her legs suddenly feeling weak. The world outside the glass walls of her mansion seemed so distant, so irrelevant now. She had always trusted Victor. He had always been her rock, but now she was questioning everything. Was it really possible that everything she knew about her husband, about their life together, was built on lies? Her hands trembled as she typed a response, deleting it before she could send anything. What do I even ask him? She walked to the window, staring out at the city below, at the life they had built together. She could see the reflections of the skyline in the glass, just like the reflections of the doubts that now consumed her. Is he hiding something from me? She couldn't push the thought away. There it was again, the feeling, the uncertainty. Eleanor had always been able to control everything in her life, but now she was drowning in a sea of doubt. She had always prided herself on her sharp instincts, her ability to read people, but this was different. This was something she couldn't explain. She needed answers. She had to know the truth, no matter what it was. The decision to act. Location. Eleanor's penthouse. The choice. Days passed since Eleanor first found the message, but the unease gnawed at her every moment. The uncertainty began to consume her. Each conversation with Victor felt strained, every moment together laced with tension. She could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her, drowning out the calm, collected persona she had spent years perfecting. Eleanor had always been in control of her life, her business, her marriage, but now she found herself spiraling, haunted by a question that she couldn't ignore. What if the man I've trusted my entire life is hiding something from me? She hadn't confronted Victor, not yet. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but she knew that if she did ask him, the facade they had built might shatter. She couldn't let her doubts ruin everything they had worked for. She had to know the truth, and she had to do it on her own terms. Late one evening, after another silent dinner that felt more like a distant memory than the intimate moments they once shared, Eleanor sat in front of the mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she brushed through her hair. Her reflection stared back at her, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. The poised, confident woman she once was now felt distant. She couldn't just sit and wait any longer. She had to act. A plan began to form, something extreme, something unthinkable. It would require her to step into an entirely different world, a world where she wouldn't be recognized, where her wealth and status would no longer shield her. She would have to disguise herself, disappear and investigate Victor without his knowledge. It was drastic, but the thought of living in uncertainty any longer made her stomach twist. Sophia's fingers hovered over the phone once more. She typed, "Can I trust him?" But she deleted it just as quickly, the question unanswered. It was then that the idea struck her. She would disguise herself as a taxi driver, a lowly, ordinary worker, someone invisible, someone unnoticed. In this disguise, she would be able to observe Victor without him suspecting anything. The thought of it made her feel sick to her stomach, but it also filled her with a strange sense of resolve. She had to know what he was hiding, and she was willing to do anything to uncover the truth. The next morning, Eleanor put her plan into motion. She contacted a service to rent a taxi for the day, and when it arrived, she stood before the mirror, looking at the simple uniform she had chosen, a plain shirt, jeans, and a cap. Her appearance was drastically different from the poised, high-end woman she was known to be. She barely recognized herself. She looked at herself one last time. The woman she saw was a far cry from the woman she had been just a few days ago. The powerful businesswoman who had everything now felt small, lost in her own deception. But she pushed those thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to let her emotions cloud her judgment. As she put on her sunglasses and adjusted the cap, she steeled herself for what was to come. She was no longer Eleanor, the billion-dollar heiress. She was just a faceless taxi driver. She stepped out into the bustling streets of Manhattan, feeling like a stranger in her own life. The city that had once been her domain now felt foreign and chaotic, as if she was seeing it for the first time through new eyes, but she couldn't afford to let her guard down. Her heart raced as she drove through the streets, following the route she knew would lead her to Victor. She was terrified of what she might find, but she was equally terrified of not knowing. Today, everything would change. She would uncover the truth. She had no choice. A sneak peek into his world. Location: Victor's office. The first glimpse. Eleanor's heart raced as she drove the yellow taxi through the busy streets of Manhattan, her grip on the wheel tight as the city buzzed around her. The skyscrapers loomed above, their glass facades gleaming in the midday sun, but they felt distant, foreign. For years, she had been the one people noticed, the powerful woman, the business magnate, the wife of Victor. Now, she was just another anonymous face in the crowd, a woman hiding behind dark sunglasses and a worn taxi cab. Her nerves were on edge as she approached Victor's office building. She had followed him from their penthouse, keeping her distance, watching him through the rear-view mirror. He had gone about his day just like any other, completely unaware that his wife was now an invisible observer, watching his every move. She could feel her breath catch in her throat as she neared the building. Would this be the moment she found out what he was hiding? Or would her fears turn out to be nothing more than a product of her own paranoia? She parked across the street from the entrance, her eyes scanning the bustling sidewalk. Victor had been inside the office for hours now, and she had no idea what he was up to. But something felt off, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Was she overthinking things? Was this all just a misunderstanding, or was there something darker beneath the surface? Eleanor sat in the taxi, watching, waiting. Time passed slowly, the seconds stretching out like minutes. She could hear the faint hum of the city around her, but it felt like she was in a bubble, isolated from the rest of the world. Her mind raced with questions. Why was he so secretive? What was he working on? The anxiety of not knowing was beginning to eat at her, gnawing away at her composure. Then, just as she was about to convince herself to leave and forget about it all, she saw him. Victor emerged from the building, his expression calm as he adjusted his suit jacket. He didn't look nervous, didn't look like someone trying to hide anything. But Eleanor's gaze followed him closely as he walked to the curb and hailed a cab. She immediately started the engine, staying a few car lengths behind as he climbed into the back seat of the taxi. Her heart raced again, but this time there was a new feeling, a sense of determination. This was it. This was the moment that would reveal everything. The cab sped through the city, making a few turns as it headed toward an unfamiliar part of town. Eleanor followed at a distance, keeping her eyes trained on Victor's cab. She tried to calm her nerves, but the unknown was like a heavy weight on her chest. What was he doing? Where was he going? The anticipation grew with every turn. Finally, they pulled up to a building that looked completely out of place. It wasn't a hotel, not a luxurious office building like the ones Victor usually frequented. It was an old, nondescript building, tucked away in a corner of the city that seemed forgotten by time. Eleanor parked a few blocks away, watching as Victor exited the taxi and walked inside without a glance back. She waited for a moment, her mind racing with possibilities. This was nothing like what she expected. Could this be where the affair was happening? Was this where all the secrecy was coming from? Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel, the tension building inside her. She had to know what was going on. She couldn't let him slip away again. Eleanor took a deep breath and stepped out of the taxi. The cool air hit her face, the sounds of the city muffled in the distance. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but the need for answers pushed her forward. Slowly, she made her way toward the building, keeping her distance, trying to blend in with the crowds. She wasn't sure what she would find, but the fear of the unknown was nothing compared to the fear of living with her suspicions. As she reached the building, she hesitated for just a moment. The door was cracked open, and she could hear the faint sounds of voices from inside. Eleanor took one last glance around, steeling herself, and then she slipped inside. The million-dollar secret, location, the hidden meeting, the truth revealed. Eleanor's heart raced in her chest as she stepped cautiously into the dimly lit lobby of the building. The air was thick with the scent of dust and old furniture, and the faint sound of voices echoed through the walls. The place looked far from what she expected, far from the glamorous offices and high-powered meetings she was used to. This wasn't a place for illicit affairs. It was something different entirely. Victor's figure moved ahead of her, disappearing through a door at the end of the hallway. Eleanor, her breath shallow, followed quietly, trying to remain unnoticed. She stood just outside the door, listening carefully. The voices she heard were coming from inside, but they weren't the kind of whispers she expected. The conversation inside was focused, professional, and serious. It wasn't what she'd imagined. It wasn't passion or flirtation. It was all business. Eleanor strained her ears, trying to catch more of the words. The name Riverton Enterprises stood out, and she heard the word expansion several times. Her mind raced to keep up with the conversation. What was this? Was this the deal Victor had been so secretive about? Could this be the thing that had kept him from her? "It's a billion-dollar project," a voice inside said. Eleanor could barely breathe. "If we pull this off, we'll have a global footprint. We need to get the final paperwork signed by next week, or we risk losing the deal." The weight of the words hit Eleanor like a ton of bricks. A billion-dollar project. Her mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. So this wasn't about an affair, this wasn't betrayal. No, this was something entirely different, something Victor had been keeping from her. For a long moment, Eleanor stood frozen, her hand pressed against the doorframe as she pieced together the fragments of the conversation. Victor wasn't hiding an affair. He was hiding the biggest business deal of his career, one that could change everything for them. It was all business, just as Victor had said, but as Eleanor absorbed the magnitude of what she was hearing, something else sank in. He hadn't told her. He hadn't shared this monumental opportunity with her, and she realized why. He was trying to protect her. Victor had always been protective of her, but this time, his protective instinct had led him to keep something from her, a project that carried immense risk and could make or break their future. The shock of it was overwhelming. Eleanor felt the sting of betrayal, but not in the way she expected. He hadn't been hiding an affair. He had been hiding his own fears. The fear of losing her, the fear of burdening her with the weight of something this big. Eleanor's mind raced as she processed everything. She had misjudged him completely. All her fears had been grounded in doubt, in insecurity, and now she was faced with the painful truth. She didn't trust him enough. As she stood there, the conversation continued inside. She heard the final details being hashed out. "We'll make the announcement next month. We'll need you at the press conference." Eleanor couldn't move. She stood there, listening to her husband's future unfold without her, realizing that she had spent the past days building up a storm of doubt, when all the while Victor had been planning their future. He had kept her out of it, thinking it was for her own good, but in doing so, he had pushed her further away. She took a deep breath, finally stepping away from the door. She had come here to uncover the truth, and what she found was not what she expected. She had come in search of betrayal, But what she uncovered was far more complicated. It was fear. It was love. It was a vision for their future. The burden of secrets. Location: Eleanor's penthouse. The quiet realization. The drive back to the penthouse was a blur. Eleanor's thoughts were a whirlwind, colliding with one another, each one more confusing than the last. The city outside her window seemed distant, as if she were looking at it through a fog. Her mind couldn't stop replaying the conversation she had overheard. Victor's secretive behavior, the billion-dollar project, his intention to protect her. It was so much to process, and yet she still felt like she was missing something. She had expected to uncover a hidden affair, to find proof of betrayal, and to confront Victor with the hurt she had been carrying for days. But what she had found was entirely different. It wasn't infidelity. It wasn't even a personal betrayal, but the depth of his secrecy had felt like one. As Eleanor entered the penthouse, she felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The grandeur of the space, the coldness of the polished floors, the stark beauty of the design, it all seemed irrelevant now. The home that had once symbolized their success now felt like a monument to the distance between them. She sat down at the bar, staring at the glass of wine in front of her, untouched. The weight of the evening's revelations pressed heavily on her chest. Why did he keep this from me? She thought. Why didn't he trust me enough to share this with me? Her mind circled around the same question, again and again, each turn revealing a new layer of doubt. She had built an empire with Victor. They had shared everything: business deals, financial risks, dreams for the future. But this was something that had been kept from her, and she didn't know how to feel about it. Eleanor had always prided herself on being in control, on knowing everything about her life and her relationships. But now she felt like a stranger in her own marriage. The secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, had left her feeling lost, disconnected. The silence of the penthouse was deafening. Every detail of their life together seemed to mock her, reminding her of the walls Victor had built between them. Had it been out of love or out of fear? She hadn't asked him about the deal, not yet. She wasn't sure how to approach it or what to say. All she knew was that the distance between them felt insurmountable. The truth that she had uncovered hadn't brought the relief she expected. Instead, it had created more questions. The guilt started to settle in. She had doubted him. She had suspected the worst about the one person she had trusted with everything. And now, all she had was a tangled mess of emotions, relief mixed with betrayal, understanding mixed with hurt. The burden of these secrets weighed her down, and the only way to lift it was to face Victor. But how could she? She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. The skyline seemed endless, the lights twinkling in the night like distant stars. She and Victor had always dreamed of conquering the world together. They had built this life together. But now, she wasn't sure how to find her place in that dream anymore. As she stood there, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Victor had returned. She took a deep breath, the emotions still raw. This was it. She had to face him. She had to ask the questions that had been plaguing her for days. It was time for the truth to come out. Not just the truth about his business deal, but the truth about their relationship. Confrontation. A turning point. Location: Eleanor and Victor's penthouse. The moment of truth. Victor's footsteps echoed down the hallway, each one growing louder as he made his way into the penthouse. Eleanor's heart fluttered in her chest, her emotions a mix of dread and anticipation. She had been preparing for this moment, the moment where she would confront him about everything. The truth was out there now, laid bare before her, and it was time to face it. She stood in the middle of their expansive living room, her back to the city, the warm glow of the evening light falling across her. Victor entered, setting down his briefcase, his face soft with weariness from the long day. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, Eleanor felt that familiar warmth, the man she had once loved with her whole heart. But that warmth felt distant now, overshadowed by the coldness of unspoken words between them. "Eleanor," Victor said softly, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" Eleanor didn't respond right away. She looked at him, her gaze sharp and intense, as though she was seeing him for the first time. A part of her still wanted to believe that he had a simple explanation, that there was a reason for all the secrecy, but another part of her knew that the truth was more complicated than that. She couldn't keep hiding from it any longer. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice calm, almost detached. "But I need to talk to you about something I found." Victor's face flickered with concern, but he didn't say anything. He only nodded, his expression unreadable. Eleanor took a deep breath and steeled herself. No more avoiding the truth. The words she had rehearsed in her head came out, raw and unfiltered. "I know about the project," she said, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of her emotions. "I overheard you talking at the office. The billion-dollar deal. The expansion. I know you've been keeping it from me. I need to know why. Victor, why didn't you tell me about this?" Victor's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, he said nothing. His gaze dropped to the floor, and when he looked up again, there was an openness to him, a vulnerability that she hadn't seen in a long time. "I didn't want you to worry," he finally admitted. "I didn't want to burden you with it, Eleanor. The pressure has been immense. I wanted to shield you from all the stress. I thought if I kept it from you, I could protect you from the weight of everything." Eleanor's chest tightened, her heart aching as she listened to his explanation. It wasn't what she had expected. She had been ready to hear something else, an apology for betraying her trust, an explanation of a hidden affair. But this was different. It was worse in its own way, because it meant that Victor had been keeping something monumental from her. Not because he was unfaithful, but because he didn't believe she could handle the truth. "You should have trusted me," Eleanor said quietly, her voice shaking with the sting of it all. "You didn't have to protect me from the world, Victor. I've always been your partner. This was something we should have been facing together." Victor's face softened and he stepped forward, reaching for her hand. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I see now. I see how wrong I was. You're not just my wife, Eleanor. You're my partner in everything. I should have known that." Eleanor pulled her hand away gently, her emotions swirling. She wasn't just his wife. She was his equal. That was the part she had forgotten in the chaos of everything that had happened. The secrecy had clouded her judgment, just as much as it had clouded his. They had both failed each other, and now they were standing at the crossroads, wondering how to rebuild what had been broken. "I trusted you with everything," she said, her voice soft but full of pain. "But now I don't know what to believe. The fact that you kept this from me. It's not just about the project. It's about everything. Why didn't you think I could handle it?" Victor's eyes filled with regret, his voice low. "I was wrong. I see that now. You've always been strong enough to handle anything. I've always known that. But I let fear control me. I didn't want to risk losing you. I thought keeping you in the dark was the safest way." A bitter laugh escaped Eleanor's lips, and she shook her head, the weight of their history between them now settling heavily in the room. "You've been keeping me in the dark about everything, haven't you? It's not just the project, Victor. It's about our life. All these years, you've hidden parts of yourself from me, thinking it would protect me. But all it did was create this distance between us." Victor's expression softened further, and for the first time, Eleanor saw the man she had fallen in love with, a man who was vulnerable, imperfect, but still capable of love. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't trust you with my fears, but now I'm asking you to trust me again, to trust that I'll be honest with you no matter what." There was a long silence between them, both of them searching for something in each other's eyes, something they had lost but hoped could still be found. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice fragile but determined. "I don't know if we can go back to how things were, but I do know that we need to start from here. No more secrets, no more fear. We'll rebuild, Victor, but it starts with us being honest, with each other, and with ourselves." Victor nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll do whatever it takes to prove it to you. I promise, no more secrets." Eleanor's heart still ached, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of clarity. They had a long way to go, but this moment was a beginning, an imperfect but necessary step forward. The apology and the truth location, Eleanor and Victor's penthouse, a moment of truth and vulnerability. The air in the room was thick with silence. Eleanor stared at Victor, her heart still pounding from the revelation. All this time, she had assumed the worst about him, her mind racing with images of betrayal. But now, sitting here, it felt like everything she had feared had been shattered. The truth she had discovered was far more complex than she could have ever imagined. Victor's voice broke through the silence, low and filled with emotion. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I never meant for you to find out like this. I wanted to protect you. I thought that if I kept it from you, it would keep you safe from the pressure, but I was wrong. I should have trusted you with the truth from the start." Eleanor's breath hitched. "You've been lying to me for months, Victor. You kept me in the dark, not because you were protecting me, but because you were afraid of me seeing the reality of what you were going through." Her voice wavered, the hurt in her words clear. Victor stood up, pacing the room, struggling to find the right words. "I never wanted you to feel that way. This project is bigger than anything we've ever done. It's not just about business, it's about securing our future. But I got so caught up in it. I pushed you away and I let the secrecy build. And I see now that I hurt you in the process." Eleanor's heart was torn between anger and understanding. She had been so consumed by the thought of him betraying her. But now, sitting here in the quiet aftermath of his confession, she could see how deeply the pressure had affected him. He had been trying to protect her, in his own misguided way, from the stress and the weight of the business. "I just don't understand why you didn't trust me enough to share this with me," Eleanor said softly, her eyes filling with tears. "We've always been partners, Victor. You know I'm capable of handling the tough stuff. Why shut me out?" Victor walked over to her, kneeling down to meet her gaze, his eyes filled with regret. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now that I've made everything worse. You've always been my partner, my equal, and I should have treated you as such. I'm sorry for not trusting you with the truth." Eleanor wiped away a tear, her heart heavy with the weight of their conversation. "I should have never let my suspicions take over. I jumped to conclusions without knowing the whole story. I'm sorry for that too." Victor's face softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hands in his. "We're both to blame here, but that's what makes us stronger, Eleanor. We've faced so much together, and we'll face this too, together." Eleanor nodded slowly, her chest tightening with emotion. She could feel the sincerity in his words. They had both made mistakes, but the love they had for each other was still there, raw and unspoken, but real. She could see it in the way he looked at her now, with a vulnerability that was impossible to ignore. "I know we'll get through this," she whispered, squeezing his hands, "but we need to do it differently this time. We need to be open, honest, with each other and with ourselves." Victor smiled softly, nodding in agreement. "I agree. No more secrets, no more hiding. We'll face everything together." And in that moment, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. The journey ahead would be difficult, but they had taken the first step toward healing. The truth was out, and while it had been painful, it had also brought them closer. Healing the rift location, Eleanor's penthouse, rebuilding trust. The days after their confrontation were filled with quiet moments and difficult conversations. The apartment, once filled with tension and unspoken words, now felt like a space where they could both finally breathe. Slowly but surely, they began the process of rebuilding, not just their trust in each other, but their sense of connection. Eleanor, despite her initial anger and hurt, began to see the situation from a new perspective. Victor had been trying to shield her from the weight of his work, but in doing so, he had alienated her. She could understand his intentions now. He had been trying to protect her, but in the end, he had only pushed her away. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow across the skyline, Eleanor sat with Victor at the kitchen table, sipping wine. The atmosphere was calm, and for the first time in a while, she felt like they were in sync again. The quiet tension that had once filled the room gone. "We've both made mistakes," Eleanor said, breaking the silence. "But I want to work through this. I want to rebuild what we've lost. I need to know that I can trust you again." Victor looked at her, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I want that too, more than anything. I've been an idiot keeping secrets from you. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was hurt you. You deserve so much more than that, Eleanor." Eleanor took a deep breath. "I was so focused on the fear of betrayal that I missed the bigger picture. I didn't see how hard you were working, how much you were carrying. I've been selfish in my own way too." They both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their confessions hanging in the air. The honesty between them was raw, but it felt like the first step in a long process of healing. They had acknowledged the cracks in their relationship, but now they were choosing to face them head-on, together. Victor reached across the table and took her hand in his. the warmth of his touch a comforting reassurance. "We can fix this, Eleanor. We'll face the challenges together, and we'll rebuild from here. But we have to promise to always be open. No more secrets." Eleanor squeezed his hand, her eyes searching his for the truth in his words. "No more secrets," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For the first time in a long while, she felt like they were on the same page. They had been through so much, and the road ahead would undoubtedly be difficult. But for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope. A new purpose location, Raphael's office and their home, new beginnings. The healing process wasn't immediate. Trust, once broken, doesn't return overnight, but Eleanor and Victor were committed. The conversations became more frequent, the space between them less tense. Their marriage, their partnership, began to evolve into something stronger, built on the foundation of honesty. Eleanor, ever the driven woman, knew that life couldn't go back to how it was before. She had spent years dedicating herself to her empire, but in all that time, she had neglected one crucial thing, the relationship she had with the man who had always been by her side. She was no longer just a wife in this partnership. She was a collaborator, a partner in both business and life. As they continued to work together on the billion-dollar expansion project, Eleanor's role shifted. She wasn't just the supportive spouse anymore, she was an integral part of the deal. One afternoon, as they sat at Raphael's office, reviewing documents for the new projectee, Eleanor felt a wave of pride. She wasn't just along for the ride, she was driving it. Victor looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, she saw his admiration for her reflected in his eyes. "You know, I never realized how much you could contribute to this project," Victor said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "I always thought I had to protect you from the stress, but now I see how much you can handle. You're not just my wife, Eleanor, you're my equal." Eleanor smiled softly, her eyes shining with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known in years. "I've always been capable, Victor. But for too long I let myself be defined by the roles you and society expected of me. I'm not just your partner in business, I'm your equal in everything, and I'm proud of that." Her words resonated in the room, filling the space with a new energy. Eleanor had rediscovered her own voice, her own power. She wasn't just playing a supporting role in her own life, she was the lead. As they worked side by side, sharing the burden of the expansion, they discovered something else. How much more they could achieve together than they ever could apart. The tension, the secrecy, had pushed them away for so long, but now they were finding their rhythm again. Their partnership was becoming more than just a marriage. It was a shared vision, a collaborative effort that extended beyond the business world. At home, their dynamic had shifted too. They were no longer two people living parallel lives. They were working together on everything, from the smallest decisions to the most important ones. And for the first time, Eleanor felt truly seen, not just as a woman of wealth, but as a woman of substance with ideas and opinions that were valued. One evening, after another successful meeting, Eleanor and Victor sat on the balcony of their penthouse, watching the sunset. The city below seemed peaceful, almost surreal. They had worked hard to get to this point, and while the road ahead was still uncertain, they were no longer afraid of what it might bring. "I think we're building something incredible," Eleanor said, her voice full of conviction. "Not just in business, but in life. We're building something real, something that's ours." Victor nodded, his hand resting gently on hers. Together, always together. They were no longer just a wealthy couple with a beautiful home. They had found a new sense of purpose, one that was rooted in mutual respect, trust, and a shared vision for their future. The ultimate test of trust location, business presentation, the final moment of truth. The moment they had been working toward for months had finally arrived. The culmination of their labor, the billion-dollar expansion project that had consumed both their professional and personal lives, was about to be presented to a room full of investors. This was the moment that could secure their future, both financially and as a couple. The stakes were higher than ever. Eleanor and Victor stood side by side, entering the sleek glass-walled conference room with a quiet but undeniable sense of power. The lights from the city outside reflected off the windows, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. But inside the room, everything was tense. Investors from all corners of the world were watching, scrutinizing every detail of the presentation. As they walked up to the podium, Eleanor could feel her heart racing, but this time she wasn't afraid. The doubts that once plagued her were gone. She knew who she was now, who they were, and together they could face anything. Victor began the presentation, speaking with confidence, laying out the details of the deal, how the expansion would revolutionize their company, how it would open doors to new markets, new opportunities. He was eloquent, precise, the kind of businessman he had always been. But this time, Eleanor stood by him, contributing just as much, offering insights and answering questions with an assurance she had never known before. The investors were engaged, nodding in approval, their skepticism slowly melting away as the presentation unfolded. But just when it seemed like everything was going perfectly, a voice interrupted, the voice of an investor known for his sharp criticism and high expectations. "This sounds promising, but we've seen these kinds of deals fail before. What makes you think this one will succeed when the risks are so high?" The room grew silent, all eyes on the couple as they processed the question. This wasn't just about business anymore. It felt like a test of everything they had worked for. Their trust, their relationship, their commitment to each other. Eleanor took a deep breath, exchanging a brief but knowing glance with Victor. They had been here before, vulnerable, exposed, ready to confront their fears. This time they would face it together without hesitation. Victor looked at her, his eyes searching for reassurance. With a steady hand, Eleanor nodded, and then, as if the weight of the moment had passed to her, she spoke. "We're not just asking you to invest in a business," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "We're asking you to invest in trust. Trust in the years we've spent building this company. Trust in the hard work, the risks we've taken, and the sacrifices we've made. This deal isn't just about profit, it's about building something that will last, something that will change lives, including the lives of those who believe in it." The room was still, the investors leaning forward, listening intently. Eleanor's words hung in the air like a promise. "We may be taking a risk, but we've learned that real success comes from trusting each other and trusting the people around us. We're offering you that trust today." For a moment, the investor didn't speak. The silence stretched out, and Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. But then, slowly, the skeptical investor nodded. "All right," he said. "I believe in your vision. Let's make this happen." A wave of relief swept over Eleanor and Victor, and they shared a brief glance, their shared triumph resonating between them. This was more than just a business deal. It was a testament to everything they had been through, the lies, the distrust, the healing. It was their victory, both professionally and personally. As the presentation concluded and the investors stood to leave, Eleanor and Victor exchanged quiet smiles. They had done it. The business deal was secured, and their relationship had been tested and strengthened in ways they never could have imagined. The road ahead was still uncertain, but now they were ready for it. Together. "We've come so far," Eleanor whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." Victor smiled back, his hand gently squeezing hers. "Together," he echoed. "Always together." As they left the conference room, walking side by side, it wasn't just the success of the deal that filled them with pride. It was the bond they had rebuilt, the trust they had fought for, and the love they had rediscovered. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew one thing for sure: they would face them together.